Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Well, good evening, friends, and welcome to this December 1st, 2014 edition of Nightcast. Severe storms continue to batter the western Mediterranean with damaging winds and torrential downpours. The latest has brought severe flooding to southern France, where 5 people have died. That makes this story, if we go to our chart, let me bring it forward really quickly. Count over 4 columns you see there where it says pale, number 4 at the top. It's got a little green horse up at the top of it, and it says pale. That's a depiction from Revelation 6 of the 4th seal being depicted by a pale-colored horse whose rider is named Death, alongside whom Hades, hell, the grave, rides. Jesus Christ described the activities of this horse as in 3 ways. One was loimos, meaning disease epidemics, pestilence, the plagues of Egypt. He also described it as seismus. He also described it as terrake, disturbances, troubled waters. And that relates to this first story in the sense of troubled waters because it's both literally and figuratively. And it relates to seismus, meaning commotions in the air, such as gale force winds of all kinds, and commotions on the ground, such as this one in our opening story tonight, where the severe flooding in France has 5 people to die. That makes the rider of the pale horse related to this story. And let me come right into it. Thousands of people have been forced to evacuate their homes. With his opening story for tonight, friends, the BBC's weather reporter Darren Bett has this report.
The rain just keeps battering this region for days, if not weeks, actually. The latest victim was a 73-year-old man who died of heart failure in the Pyrenees Oriental region when trying to for a big dip in a flooded road. Some 2,800 people living along the banks of the Agly River in the same region had been evacuated by late afternoon Sunday, and 560 people had to leave their homes in Cannes and Baccarès on the Mediterranean coast. The Prime Minister's office described the flooding as exceptional, and it's already considered more serious than the deadly river overflows that killed 35 people in 1999. The River Bear is reportedly now a metre above the level that caused such devastation back then. Many buildings and cars have been destroyed, and around 250 people fled from the low-lying land and lagoons just south of Narbonne. France's national forecast agency Météo France issued severe weather alerts across 13 areas in the south of France and Corsica ahead of the storms. It's now also predicted more heavy rainfall for the Var and Alpes-Maritimes regions, which are already saturated after days of heavy rain.
And friends, in Gaza, there's also been flooding, and we'll go next story. War-torn Gaza hit by heavy rain and flooding. The lead-in for this story reads, and I'm not going to switch this to the red horse though, because even though there's more disturbance in the area than there is actual warfare at the moment. There's just a hatred for the offspring of Isaac by Ishmael. But at the moment, it's just a matter of a story that's related to that first story where there's flooding in France. There's flooding in Gaza. And there's no commentary with this video footage here, friends. You can just have a look at the situation in Gaza, flooding there. And just as in France, it's causing havoc. We don't know of any known deaths in Gaza because of this flooding, but there is flooding there in the Middle Eastern area next to Israel, along the coast, Gaza. Friends, our next story relates to, give me just a moment, I need my teleprompter notes up on this one, friends, relates to sanctions and Russia, and how sanctions on Russia are hitting UK businesses, United Kingdom businesses. Travel bans and asset freezes have been in place on a number of Russian individuals and their businesses since the United States and the EU imposed sanctions on Moscow because of its support for separatists in eastern Ukraine. The sanctions have also hit some UK companies for whom Russia was a key export market. They've been unable to trade with Russia since March this year. Caroline Bailey reports on the impact of the sanctions on two British businesses.
Plunging to the depth, a remote-controlled robot carrying out the job of a deep-sea diver. Each one costs £2.5 million. Companies use them to develop offshore oil fields all around the world. They're made here at this specialist subsea engineering factory in Newcastle. The company, SMD, sells most of them abroad. 1/5 of its business customers are in Russia, or at least they were. In July, the EU announced it was strengthening sanctions against Russia to include defence and off interests.
On average, Russia accounts for 20% of our business, which roughly equates to 100 jobs, about £20 million worth of revenue within the business. Fortunately, we can protect that as a downside because we've got other opportunities in other markets. But if Russian sanctions don't get lifted, clearly competitor nations who aren't subject to the sanctions will actually be entering the marketplace, and I guess that's the real and long-term threat for a business like ours.
It's not just specialist subsea engineering companies like this one that have found themselves shut out of a key market. In August, Russia retaliated by banning food imports from America and the EU. And that's affected sales of Scottish mackerel. Prior to the ban, Russia imported the fish from here, even through the Cold War. Now they're buying it from countries not covered by the restrictions, leaving these processes to look for new markets.
If the sanctions are lifted, it will be difficult to get the market back. The market in Russia has adapted to the product from Faroe, Iceland and Greenland. We will still get some products sold into Russia because of the better quality and the historical relationship, but it will be a big challenge to get that market back.
The government says it recognises there is a cost to business, but it argues the sanctions are necessary and further action could be taken.
Sanctions could be tightened further. That depends on what happens in Russia and in Ukraine. So far, when sanctions have been tightened, it has been in response to aggressive action by the Russians or by Russia's reneging upon international agreements which she has entered into.
The government says it is helping companies find other markets to do business with. However, there are no guarantees and it's not offering financial help. Caroline Bailey, B News.
And friends, this next story, though it comes from our archive from the 14th of last month, November 14, it's very relative to this video story I just played from today's news, where in this video report from 2 weeks ago on November 14 this year, 2014, Russian President Vladimir Putin has accused the United States of undermining the very trade institutions it created by imposing sanctions on Russia. He was speaking ahead of the G20 summit last month in Brisbane, where tensions were expected over the situation in Ukraine. The BBC's, remember now, we're listening to a report from November 14, as you hear Steve Rosenberg report on President Putin's comments, which still relate to this news story from today that you just heard.
Now, let's talk about some G20 countries introducing sanctions against Russia. Of course, it is against the very principles and activity of G20. It also contradicts international law because sanctions can be introduced only within the framework of the United Nations and its Security Council.
I don't know if he believes he can actually win a battle over sanctions. He's actually not going to bring the subject up at the G20. He's made that clear. But he wants to make it clear to the West and to the domestic audience too that sanctions, in his view, are a mistake. And Russia's partners in the West, as he describes them, to...
And Frizz, it may be just temporary and just momentary, I hope, but our video player just hung up. We are having some software encoder streaming problems. I've contacted the company that made our software, and they've instructed us what to do. It's not something I can do overnight. It involves loading some completely new software and completely restructuring, resetting up our camera shots, and some that I spent over a year designing and making. So it won't happen overnight, but we'll wait for another moment, see if that's going to pick up and play. Well, no, it wasn't, but I think we got the main gist of that story, that President Putin of Russia feels and gave reasons why, look, you guys, these sanctions you put on us are twofold. They're like a two-edged sword. It cuts both ways, like the Bible. It has adverse impact upon you who are putting the sanctions upon us, because the trading deals that the businesses from your country had with us, Russia, are being impacted by this. The companies that depended, who did primary business with Russia, well, we're buying elsewhere now because of these sanctions you put on us. And now these sanctions you put on us are having adverse impact on you. And you know, friends, sometimes in this world, the wisdom of this world that says, you know, we're not going to depend on God, we're going to fight our own wars and battles. You know, you need to look to if you're going to go that way, it's just like instead of depending on God for your healing, if you're not going to put your faith 100% in God and then let Him decide which way you go, you know, you put your trust in Him, and oftentimes you see, wow, He pulled me out of this. You know, there are situations where we have to do our part. If we're doing something that causes us to be sick, God wants to see us stop doing what causes the sickness, because if He heals you and you haven't stopped doing what causes the sickness, this healing is only going to last for a moment. You might not even know you were healed, because you're going to turn right around and get the sickness you had again if you're continuing to do the cause of the sickness. And you know, but in battle and war, in warfare, if you're not going to but the point was about healing. As Mr. Herbert Armstrong wisely said, the man whom God raised up for these latter days to expound the truths of God to us and to give us prophecies that God revealed through Him. And he said, related to faith and healing, if you don't have the faith in God, and you would have more faith in your doctors, then you better do everything those doctors say. Well, if you're going to not trust in God for your defense and protection as a nation, then you'd better do everything your wise, experienced generals tell you. And you better look to them for advice. And the elderly ones, like, I shake my head in dismay so many times when I look at the current administration ignoring the sage, experienced advice from former United States Secretary of State George P. Shultz when he spoke out in December or late November, early December last year, right after nations, the six nations that tried to negotiate with Iran to cut a deal, quote-unquote deal, out of Geneva in the Geneva talks. On the heels of that, former United States Secretary of State George P. Shultz, in an interview with the BBC, said, Iran will smile at you, send you on your way, and cut your throat. He said they're a tough bunch to negotiate with. He essentially said you can't trust them. And then in December, on December 11, a former advisor, an advisor to the former president of Iran, went on Syrian television, and though he spoke in the Arabian language, we were able to get that video for you. It wasn't restricted, wasn't licensed, it was current events news anyway, and we played it with English subtitles on the bottom, where that advisor to the former president of Iran sat there and said, we tricked you. We tricked the six leaders, world leaders in the Geneva talks. We've got uranium, told them about that we would reduce 20%, which was only at this level anyway. We'd knock it down 20%. But we didn't tell you about this other uranium we got that's already much higher percentage of uranium than that. Underground, we're working on and continuing to develop it toward a nuclear bomb. And once we have equal, and he just sat there and said, anyway, we're in war with the United States and Israel. And basically said you can't, and he actually did say the words too. It's in our archive. You can go back and look at it. We played it shortly after December 11 in last year, 2013. You can see that advisor to the former president of Iran saying outright, plain, I don't know if I'm right without any notes in front of me, friends, but he essentially said, when you negotiate with Iran and you think you have won, you haven't. You've really lost if you think you've won, which underscores what former U.S. Secretary of State George P. Shultz said when he said they'll smile at you, send you on your way, and cut your throat. It's unfortunate that the current administration didn't listen to that elder senior advice. And, you know, that's the situation. That's an unfortunate thing. But you should, if you're going to fight your wars, you better listen to your experienced senior advisors. Now, this next news, and so with the Russian president, in this last story, saying, look, your sanctions really aren't working. We're making, because of it, you know, he didn't say this in this interview, but he has said before, and he's shown, the news stories have shown how the Russian president and the leaders of China have gotten together and they've cut deals, and Russia's got the gas that Europe needs, and it wasn't well thought out. You know, attempting sanctions against Russia that have backlash upon those who issued the sanctions. And he's explaining that, you know. He's saying, really, what you're doing, trying to do against us is backlashing on you. It's working against you. And if you were wise, instead of trying to deal with this military issue in a economic or mental way, you know, with words, you really needed to send in your armies, or NATO's armies. If you want NATO to continue, you should have put some troops in there, sent them in, and shown some equal footing, shown some force of hand. Now that we listen to. This other thing, we'll see how it goes, and we're seeing that it's backlashing on you, and we're helping make sure that it backlashes on you. That's where that's coming down. You know, and so it's also re-entering a Cold War type situation, and it's just setting the stage with the God of the world, this world behind it, setting the stage up for the revival of World War III. And that, friends, relates to our chart, where the very next thing in prophecy to be happening is going to be if you count over 5 columns, is going to be the 5th seal from the book of Revelation, the Great Tribulation, a time that Jesus Christ described in Matthew 24, verse 1, Great Tribulation, a time of troubles that is so great that there's been no trouble like it since the beginning of the world, nor ever again will be. It's a time in the future that has been referred to in the Bible as a time of Jacob's trouble. Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, who had 12 sons, including Joseph as one of them, who had 2 sons who took his name, Ephraim, who today is modern-day United Kingdom, and Manasseh, who today is modern-day United States, and through whom God promised the world would be blessed because of the blessings he would give the offspring of Joseph, the United States and the United Kingdom. And United Europe, they certainly, oh, wow, do they welcome the opportunity to take the blessing God gives to Joseph by sucking them up through Ephraim, the UK, modern-day UK, hitting them with big tax bills because of their increased gross domestic product, their increased blessings that God gave them last year. So the EU socks it to the UK, to brother Ephraim, with a big tax bill that they want to suck into the coffers of the EU. And Europe, the UK squawked about it for a while, but they're paying the tax bill. They're giving away the blessing God gives to one of the sons of Joseph through Ephraim in the UK. They're giving it to the EU and helping the EU to just establish itself further. The EU, which will at some point, some event will trigger things in the EU to wind up being either 10 nations or 10 regions of nations, or 10 areas that are totally rebordered, or at least rebordered in some way, where the highest religious leader of this world will, being, and I'll just speak outrightly, being the Pope, will be involved when those 10 nations give their power to one, whom the Bible calls a beast, who will become an emperor, because the Pope will crown him in a coronation ceremony, most likely that will occur where the coronation ceremonies have occurred in the past, when a man is crowned as emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. That happens in Frankfurt, in the Emperor's Hall, Kaiser's Hall, which is up on the 2nd floor of the City Hall, in the Romer building, the Roman building there in Frankfurt. And yes, all that was bombed toward the end of World War II, but thanks to you American taxpayers, after the war with the Marshall's Plan, the money was provided by the United States to help rebuild the Romer building, the Roman building, and on the 2nd floor, with completely brand new modernized materials to rebuild the Emperor's Hall upon the 2nd floor. It's now redecorated with portraits of past emperors who were coronated there, who were crowned there in coronation ceremonies in that hall. Portraits and statues of former emperors and German kings. And most likely this will once again be an Assyrian, a German emperor, not a Frankish one, I'm pretty sure. Because a Frankish emperor would mean Israel was involved in it. Eventually, the tribe, France being the tribe of Reuben. I got a chart I can throw up on the screen real quickly, just showing you who are today the descendants of the 12 tribes of Israel. This chart shows where they are according to the descriptions of Genesis 49, describing in explicit detail where the sons of Israel would be in the last days. Now, with that description in Genesis 49, unless God is a liar, and he is not a liar, he says through his servant Isaac, who gave the blessings to his son Jacob, Israel. He said, this is where your offspring will be. Or let's see, Genesis 49. You know, I need to check myself on who was saying that. Maybe it was Jacob. I think it was Jacob himself who was telling his sons. Yes, it was. It was Jacob himself telling his 12 sons where they would be in the last days. And this was inspired. The words were inspired by God, because there's no way Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, could have told his sons after he had them gather themselves together. And hear, verse 2 of Genesis 49, hear, you sons of Jacob, H-E-A-R, hear with your ears, you sons of Jacob, and hearken unto Israel your father. Reuben, you're my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity, and the excellency of power. Unstable as water, verse 4, he goes on to say about Reuben, you shall not excel, because you went up to your father's bed, then defiled it. He went up to my couch. And that describes Reuben, and he goes on with all the other sons in Genesis 49, and he's telling them, what shall befall you in the last days? And friends, what are the last days? They are these days we are in, just before the return of Jesus Christ. And I just want to see something real quickly in one other verse here. Yeah, then and in verse 1 he says, gather yourselves together, that right there in verse 1 of Genesis 49, if you want to check me on this, just start at the very beginning of Genesis 49, verse 1. And Jacob called unto his sons and said, gather yourselves together, that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the last days. And for that to befall those sons in the last days, that means their offspring who are alive in these last days. And so, friends, here we are in these last days, and that chart shows you where all the boys are. Now, I hope my video player has had time to recycle for the next story, so I've been ad-libbing to you just a little bit. I had planned to go right through the news, but I pray and I ask God to guide and lead my lips on this program, and sometimes some of you may think, boy, Steve, you get awfully long-winded at times. Well, I realize I do. I've actually prayed about that too and said, God, help me be more succinct and to the point, and boom out your words that you want me to speak. And if you want me to do that too, even more so, friends, add your prayers to mine, that God will, as I ask him to do when I open this mouth of mine, that he speak through it. We certainly did that through David, who asked him to do that through him, and we also know David made some mistakes, but thankfully his heart was right toward God. And God, who is rich in mercy, as David was inspired in one of the Psalms to just repeat continually, your mercy, O Lord, endureth forever. And there's a lot of encouragement to all of us through David. Here we are. Many of you who watch this program are part of a church that I've been a part of for some 50 years. And here we are, very, very scattered today. One of the things that ties us together is this internet, that this program originates on the internet and worldwide. The internet now is called the WWW, the World Wide Web, which is really interesting because our church used to be called the Worldwide Church of God. The internet, perhaps by inspiration of God, is called the World Wide Web. And a web is something that is weaved, that can help pull people together. And I don't have a group that you can join, friends, but I'm just saying that God can pull us together. I've seen a lot of questions this week people have been asking about, hey, when might God pull us together? Is it going to be any time before the gathering into the place of protection and final training? And a place in the Middle East that is triangulated, as Daniel 11 points out, in an area that will be what's the word for protected from the beast during the tribulation, that, is kept from harm by the beast. The rest of the world is impacted and affected by the beast power, but not this one little triangulation area just east of the stream that runs between I think it's called Lake Tiberias and the Dead Sea. There's a long waterway there. And just to the east of that, in the land triangulated between the children of Ammon and Daniel 11, friends, it's in Daniel 11. And I need, it's often best to go to God's Word when you're describing something. Make sure you get it right, and sometimes if it isn't in your brain at all, go back there and get the exact words right from God's Word. In Daniel 11 and in verse 41, it tells you where the triangulation is. And in verse 40, it's introducing it, saying, "And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, and with chariots, and with horsemen, and with many ships, and he shall enter into the countries, and shall overflow and pass over." So this is telling you who the next verse is talking about when we go into verse 41, where he says, "He shall enter also into the glorious land." And of course, friends, it should be obvious, the glorious land is that land that so many are jealous over, arguing over today, that for a time God has allowed his tribe of Judah, who are called Israel today, or at least for the moment, to have I hesitate to use the word possession of, but they do have the possession of it. He shall enter into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape out of his hand. So out of the hand of the beast power, these shall escape. These will not be subject to the beast power. They're protected by God. And it's the land, even Edom and Moab and the chief of the children of Ammon. So that triangulated area that is today, the land of the children of Ammon, the land of Edom, and the land of Moab. That land is visible on a map just east, big stretch in there, just east of that waterway that runs from Lake Tiberias down to the Dead Sea. And it just so happens that Petra is in that area. And, that could be the place. But it could be anywhere else within that area. But Petra certainly fits the description of when the woman meaning the church, has to flee from the great dragon that pursues them with anger after God throws him out of the heaven, after he goes up and tries to attack God and take over his throne one more last time. And all that Revelation 12. But friends, I want to finish early tonight, earlier than I've been running before. I'm trying to do this a little more succinctly, asking God to help me do that. So let's move on into our next story, which relates to this beast power thing coming, because I want to show you something real quick before we go to that next story. Something I've been on to a whole lot the past few days, and even on the weekend, on the Sabbath. On the right side of our chart over here, let me pull it out and see if I can find the button that goes over to the right side of this chart. Yeah, we can do it right here like this. Top right side shows, at the top you see it says from Revelation 17 verse 10, there are 7 kings. And then the verse 10 next mentions that 5 of them are fallen, and the 5 you see pictured on your screen right now and commented on with the columns, those 5 kings reigned between 554, and this relates to our next video story very much. These kings reigned from the restoration of the Holy Roman Empire in 554 by Justinian. You see him pictured at the top right side of your screen. Justinian restored imperial Rome. He restored what became the Holy Roman Empire, because at that point the false prophet began riding and controlling this beast being the two legs of the great image in Daniel 7, and being that they represent the two divisions of Rome and the Roman Empire, the East and the West, Constantinople, now called Istanbul, and Rome. And Justinian restored that after the Pope, at the behest of the Pope, the three little horns, the barbaric horns, got plucked up. But then there was a second, a third, a fourth head, and then finally the fifth head. The verse 10 of Revelation 17 says 5 of those 7 kings are fallen. And those 5 kings represented a period of 1,260 years that relate to when the deadly wound was healed, and it had 1,260 years of life back into it. But then at the end of that 1,260 years, in 1814, when Napoleon lost the Battle of Waterloo, you see Napoleon, the fifth head down there at the bottom, when he lost that battle at Waterloo, that dissolved the Holy Roman Empire until 1936, when Ethiopia was invaded by Mussolini, who became the 6th head of the Holy Roman Empire. Let me zoom down to the bottom. You see the top there, you see the man with the salute having his hand raised, that's Mussolini. And right after he invaded Ethiopia in 1936, he made the proclamation that he had restored the Holy Roman Empire. And God revealed that as a fact through Mr. Herbert Armstrong, who announced it nationwide in the United States in 1936, and was the person that God announced, and the fact that related to this 6th head, that Revelation 17 said 5 are fallen and 1 is. And that 1 was a future prophecy for the days between 1936 and 1945. Now, it's no longer is, and now we're just simply looking forward to the future fulfillment of the last part of verse 10 of Revelation 17 that says there's 1 yet to come. A big question mark at the bottom of that graphic. We don't know who that is yet. We're watching for that. And that makes this news story from today extremely significant, friends, because, let me come on back out of here, because what makes that very significant is the fact that in this news story you're going to see how next year marks the 200th anniversary of one of the major events that changed the course of European history, as this event marked the dissolvement of the Holy Roman Empire following the Battle of Waterloo. There are grand plans underway to mark the anniversary, including a 3D film and the biggest reenactment of the battle ever staged. Let's watch this video with the BBC's Europe correspondent Chris Morris reporting from the battle site in Belgium.
Shooting a 3D movie in the Belgian mud, not far from the actual site of the Battle of Waterloo. The film will become the centrepiece of a new museum, opening next year in time for the 200th anniversary of a battle that changed the course of European history. The highlight of the commemorations will be a reenactment of the battle itself, and everyone wants to be involved.
We will be present with 169 guys in uniform, full equipped, ready to fight and to enjoy the moment, of course.
And do you always play a Frenchman?
Yes, and
you lose every time?
Yes, and more specifically in Waterloo, yes.
Battle reenactment is big business, and it doesn't get much bigger than Waterloo. People come from all over the world to take part. These are pictures of last year's event. Hundreds of horses and cannons, and 5,000 participants, all individually screened.
Attention to detail is everything, and 2015 will see the biggest reenactment of Waterloo ever staged. It's good for the local tourist industry, of course, but one big question: who will play the starring role?
Napoleon might have lost to Wellington and his allies, but he remains Waterloo's iconic figure. This French reenactor is playing the role in the film, which will be screened at the new museum. But competition is fierce. For next year's big event, there could be a pretender to the imperial throne.
No, you're wrong. I am the real Napoleon. I am not an actor. And I'm happy to be here among my troops to lead the battle.
But I hear there is an American Napoleon too.
The Emperor Napoleon is French, sir.
A decision on who gets the imperial job will be made soon. But France, riven with debate about national decline, and an American playing Napoleon on the 200th anniversary, that could be the final Gallic straw. Chris Morris, BBC News, Waterloo.
And friends, I've saved this next story to last, to the end of the program, hoping that as you go to bed tonight, if you're watching this live, we do this program in the evening, 6 o'clock, 6 p.m. Pacific time, and then across the United States, it's 7 p.m. Mountain Time, 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. in the Eastern Time Zone. If you're in Hawaii, it's a lot earlier. It would be 3 o'clock in the afternoon or 4 o'clock in the afternoon in Alaska. But hoping this helps end your day in a way where you can get on your knees and cry out to God, "Oh God, thy kingdom come." And also, friends, so that it might help you to see that the things in this chart from Revelation 6, where God describes through Christ revealing to the Apostle John on the Isle of Patmos, the seals of Revelation 6, which God opened, and he revealed them through John, but he opened the understanding through Mr. Herbert Armstrong in these last 100 years, a little less than 100 years actually, that we might understand that Jesus Christ was describing in plain language in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, what these seals mean, and opening them up to our understanding today. And the one that relates to that fourth seal, this last story relates to that, where there is death on an almost industrial scale. And the one thing I'd like to just mention is that the next major event in prophecy to happen is the fifth seal, after the first four that have been active in some way since the days of Jesus Christ and been accelerating since that time, and really under great acceleration in these latter days. This fourth one, which has the rider named Death, that's really on a gallop. And friends, this should help. It should help all of us see and understand that this seal is so active, and the next seal, which is the next major event in prophecy to happen, as Mr. Herbert Armstrong announced and warned us of, is the Great Tribulation. That's not a picnic by any means. That is definitely something those who have been called early and offered an opportunity to escape that Great Tribulation should be wanting very much. There's nothing wrong with having a goal and a desire to be accounted worthy to escape the Great Tribulation, and equally and even more so to have a desire to be born into God's kingdom during the first resurrection. That's a goal, Mr. Armstrong said, that's a very worthy goal to have as your goal, the first resurrection. And as an interim goal, because before that first resurrection, the Great Tribulation is coming and is just down the street, according to what's happening. Unless God slows up this fourth horse galloping wildly now. He's almost in the home stretch. He's running rampantly. And you should hear that in this next story that relates to, that's headed in this way. Ebola outbreak, death on an almost industrial scale. Watch this. I'll have a few more comments and we'll close up for tonight.
They're running out of space at Freetown Cemetery. A frenzy of digging. As the machines clear more ground, the bodies arrive in quick succession. This is death on an almost industrial scale. For those in charge, all this counts as a grim sort of success. At least most of Ebola's victims are being buried fast now, before the virus can find a new home. At headquarters, there's a growing belief that Sierra Leone will avoid the more apocalyptic forecasts.
I think at the moment we are having success at holding on to but I can't see any, and I don't see the predictions of it going astronomical coming true at the moment.
But with so much aid and effort now focused here, why is Ebola still spreading out of control? We find plenty of answers on the impoverished outskirts of town. This is Mariatu Kamara with her children. For days she's been hiding the fact that she's sick. We're among the first to hear of it.
Have you called the Ebola hotline? You've not got a telephone?
Yes.
But somebody else perhaps could call for you? We could call for you.
That's when the truth comes out. She's desperate. Who will look after my children if I go away, she asks.
Yeah. Guess Mama Yasu Kamara really sick.
At which point the village headman intervenes, calling the hotline himself. We later confirm that Mariatu will be taken to hospital for testing. But what if her children are infected too?
Are you worried about your mother?
You worried what's in your mouth? What's he worried saying?
For now, they're left in the care of neighbours, which is how Ebola thrives.
Another big issue here is quarantine, and it's just not really working. Since in this house here, a 15-year-old girl died last week of suspected Ebola. Her 11 relatives are supposed to be staying indoors now for 3 weeks, but that's just not happening.
We spot one of the dead girl's brothers coming out of the crowded mosque.
Is that not dangerous?
Yeah, it's dangerous, but...
He shrugs it off, but others don't. We're told that Aminata's dead body was washed by her family, the easiest way to spread Ebola.
So the belief in traditions is stronger than the fear of Ebola?
Still, yes. People still believe in this tradition, that when someone dies, you should wash him or her.
And you can't change that?
Yeah, you can't change.
And so the graves keep filling here, in a city, for now, still losing the fight against Ebola. Andrew Harding, BBC News, Freetown.
Friends, as you heard the man announce his name himself, that was Andrew Harding, the BBC's Africa correspondent who traveled to the village of Ragbangba to find out why Sierra Leone has failed to meet its target. Now, the lead-in for this story kind of runs both ways, but when you really listen between the lines, it's not positive, friends. Here's the summary of this. A year ago, Ebola claimed its first victims in West Africa. Since then, around 6,000 people have died. 6,000 people have died. And remember the rider on this pale horse. His name is Death. And alongside that horse and its rider named Death, riding right at the heels of it, Revelation 6 says, is Hades, hell, the grave. 6,000 people have died, according to the World Health Organization figures, and thousands more have been infected. But the story says there's a glimmer of hope from the WHO. They had set themselves a target of December 1st for treating 70% of Ebola patients and burying 70% of victims safely. 70% of victims buried safely. They have managed it in Liberia and Guyana, but Sierra Leone has failed to meet its target, as we mentioned a moment ago. But friends, 6,000 people have died, and the reports, if you read other reports, it says there's a great fear that this disease is going to spread around the world. Should that not be some cause for concern that relates to this fourth seal and the fact that the next major event in prophecy that follows this fourth seal is the Great Tribulation, which, as I mentioned to you before, as Christ said from verse 21 of Matthew 24, it's a time of trouble that has not been matched since the beginning of the world. As Jesus Christ said it exactly, I'll just read it right here. He says, "For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be." It's a time coming in the future that's going to be so bad, nothing before it's ever been as bad, and nothing, thankfully, after it again will ever be as bad. It's going to be the time of World War III, the time of a martyrdom of God's saints like you've never seen before, for those who refuse to bow down and worship the image of the beast, the religious system that the God of this world has established through the Roman Catholic Church, and for those who refuse to work on the Sabbath, being branded as anathema, people who Judaize, as they'll go back to the words of the Council of Laodicea back in the 4th century, ruling with the Roman Catholic Church involved and the beast power. The Catholic Church announcing a person anathema and the beast power performing the torturous martyrdom, killing of saints. That's next, the next major event in prophecy, and as Mr. Armstrong, Herbert W. Armstrong, announced it, it will be like a mousetrap snapping shut. It's going to happen as if it were overnight. The stage is set, and the stage is being set. And the final pope, the stage for the final pope, whether it will be Pope Francis or another, Pope Francis is certainly helping set the stage for it. And things could roll together into gear overnight, very quickly. Everything is set for it now. The EU is set to suddenly decide on 10 people, to suddenly announce some event that causes them to suddenly announce they're giving their power to being redefined as 10 nations or regions that give their power to one man whom the Pope will crown as the head of it all, who will be, as the Bible describes it, he'll be the 7th and final head of the revived Holy Roman Empire. Friends, we're out of time for tonight. I hope you're getting the point and the message. Things are serious, not things to be played around with lightly. Not a time for going on and pursuing your own interest with disregard for what's happening in the world. And it's a time to be heeding Christ's words from Luke 21, verse 36, where he told us to watch the events of these first 4 seals. Watch the news that relate to these first 4 seals and be a part of them by praying about these things you see in news, praying about this horrible disease epidemic, Ebola, praying about the events that relate to the Red Horse and the war in different places around the world, and the things that relate to the deception that is going to grow even more in the weeks and months ahead. And you know, and that may be all we have. It just may be a few weeks and months before this thing is wrapped up. But I'm going to wrap up the program for tonight, friends. Thanks for joining us on this Monday evening. God willing, and the creek don't rise, we'll be back again tomorrow night with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Until next time, friends, your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying so long and good night.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.